You may have heard of Netflix before. Now imagine if someone had invented a way to get movies delivered to your house faster than Netflix could, cheaper than Netflix could. What would happen to Netflix? Well, it turns out that this actually did happen. A company called Blockbuster was so close to being the dominant force in the entertainment industry, and they literally blew it. It's me and you're watching this channel. And this is the story of how Blockbuster became a $5 billion mistake. In the early 1980s, video games were taking off. People loved playing video games at home. But there was one big problem with the current market. The stores would only let you rent games for 3 days. So a customer who wanted to play a game over a weekend would be forced to pay for an extra day just because the store wasn't open on Sunday. Enter the genius idea of one-day rentals. But the problem was that no one was doing this yet. So the question was, how do we convince customers that they want this new idea? Well, after some research, it turns out people did want this idea, but only if they could also buy the movie. So instead of just renting for 1 day, customers would rent a movie for 2 or 3 nights and then keep it forever. So this was great news for everyone. Customers got their 1-day rentals, stores got more money up front from each rental, and they got more foot traffic because now customers not only rented movies, but they also bought them. But this was just the start. The real opportunity was shipping movies directly to people's homes. And it turns out that Blockbuster wasn't the first company to think of this. There were a few startups that were already doing this, but they had a small problem. They didn't really know what they were doing. They had no marketing budget, no customer service department, and most importantly, they didn't have any money to acquire new customers. But Blockbuster changed everything. They developed a massive marketing plan that included television commercials and print advertisements. They focused heavily on customer service, which resulted in almost 0 complaints. And they even paid millions of dollars to be the exclusive provider of videos for hotels like Marriott and Hilton. In fact, Blockbuster grew so fast that it quickly became the biggest video rental company in the world. It was literally 3 times larger than its next competitor. And by 1996, the CEO was so confident in his business model that he decided to take the company public. But this is where things start to take a turn. You see, when Blockbuster went public, investors were excited to buy shares of the company. After all, it was the largest video rental company in the world. So the IPO price was set at $19 per share, but on the first day of trading, the stock shot up to $55 per share. This meant that Blockbuster instantly became worth $2.6 billion. But this was also a huge problem. Up until this point, Blockbuster's main goal was to grow. They wanted to become the world leader in video rentals, and they achieved that. But going public made their goal a lot more complicated. Now, the executives were under pressure to make shareholders happy, and the only way to do that was to make more money. So the CEO started to explore different ways to increase revenue, and he settled on one very risky strategy: buying back the company's stock. Buying back shares makes the remaining shares more valuable. For example, let's say you own 100 shares of a company. If the company buys back 10 of those shares, your ownership stake just went up to 11%, even though nothing has changed about your investment. The same thing happened with Blockbuster. By buying back 17% of its own shares, every remaining share became 21% more valuable. This meant that Blockbuster's stock price shot up by another 45%. But this was also a huge mistake. Buying back shares is normally a great strategy, but Blockbuster had a small problem. They were spending billions of dollars on share repurchases instead of investing in the future. For example, rather than using this money to develop a streaming service, they spent it on things like advertising, which didn't really help them grow. In fact, this move ended up costing them billions of dollars, but the CEO didn't care about that. He was happy to sacrifice long-term growth for short-term profits. After all, Wall Street analysts were praising him for making such a smart investment. He was awarded the Best CEO of the Year in 1998 and 1999. And the investors were loving it. They watched their investments go from $1 million to $1.8 billion in just a few years. But Blockbuster had a small problem. They were slowly bleeding customers to their competitors. For example, in 1998, customers were twice as likely to rent a movie from Hollywood Video rather than Blockbuster. And by 2002, Blockbuster's revenue started to stagnate. At this point, they realized something was wrong. Their core business was starting to fail, and the only way to save the company was to transform themselves. So they tried to reinvent themselves. For example, they launched a streaming service called Blockbuster Total Access in 2005. This allowed users to stream unlimited movies and TV shows for a monthly fee. But unfortunately, this launch was far from perfect. It was slow, glitchy, and unreliable. But honestly, that was the least of their worries. At the time, they were still trying to buy back more shares, so they didn't invest enough money into the streaming service. And by 2007, the company shut down Blockbuster Total Access. But that wasn't the end of it. They launched another streaming service in 2010. This one was much better. It worked well, it had a great selection of content, and it cost way less than Netflix. But this service had one major problem. It was called Blockbuster. You see, people thought that Blockbuster was just another one of their physical stores. So it took them a while to realize that this was an online streaming service, and this ended up costing them millions of customers. In the meantime, Netflix kept improving. They released their first original series in 2013, and they continued to dominate the market. But Blockbuster had a trick up their sleeve. In 2010, they signed a deal with Hollywood studios to keep their newest movies for 15 months. This meant that Blockbuster could offer the latest movies before Netflix could. Finally, it seemed like they were turning things around. The only problem was, they had absolutely no way to promote this. Sure, they had a bunch of old customers who still use their physical locations, but without a marketing budget, no one knew about this new feature. And to make things worse, these customers were quickly switching to streaming services like Amazon Prime Video. By 2013, Blockbuster had lost almost all of its customers. In fact, by 2017, they had lost 95% of the market. And today, there's only one Blockbuster left standing in the entire world. So Blockbuster essentially lost everything. They gave up their early mover advantage, they squandered billions of dollars, and they failed to reinvent themselves. And now, they're literally a single store in Oregon. And Blockbuster isn't the only company that's made mistakes like this. Kodak was once a $150 billion company. They invented the first digital camera in 1975, but they stuck with film because it was more profitable. And Nokia was once the largest mobile phone manufacturer in the world, but they also made the same mistake. They ignored the iPhone and Android, and they stuck with their own operating system, Symbian. But there are some companies that have successfully reinvented themselves. Polaroid is a great example. They filed for bankruptcy in 2008, but they made a comeback by focusing on instant cameras. But the biggest comeback of all time goes to Lego. They filed for bankruptcy in 2003, but ever since they partnered with Disney, their sales have been booming. So the moral of the story is that you should never ignore disruptive technologies. Just because something is working right now doesn't mean that it will work tomorrow. And that's why some of the smartest investors in the world are always looking for the next big thing. For example, Peter Thiel is investing $1 billion into nuclear fusion startups, and Jeff Bezos is betting that space travel will be the next big industry. But here's the thing, investing in new technologies is extremely risky. Most of these startups will fail, and most investments will be lost. But Thiel and Bezos don't care about that. They're willing to lose money on some investments so they can make millions on others. And you can do the same thing. It's called investing in a diversified portfolio of index funds. It's the safest way to invest in new technologies without having to pick individual winners. Basically, you're letting hundreds of brilliant minds run these companies while you sit back and relax. If you enjoy this video and you want to support this channel, please consider liking and subscribing to Trivia Salad. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.